So, you beat Metroid Dread, and if this was your first Metroid game, it's likely you're experiencing a thirst that can only be quenched by more Metroid. Well, fear not, my friend, because there are plenty more Metroid games out there for you to sink your teeth into. Especially if you own a Wii U, as nearly the entire Metroid series is available on the system's eShop. And let me just say, if you loved Metroid Dread, you are in for a treat with the rest of the Metroid series. While Dread is indeed one of the best games, these other titles include more of the franchise's signature search action gameplay, with new worlds and environments to explore, at least new to newcomers. The question now is, which of these games should you start with after finishing Metroid Dread? And well, that's going to depend on what you're looking for. Whether it's story, atmosphere, exploration, or overall feel, we have you covered. If you want to start a chronological playthrough of the series for a better understanding of the full Metroid story, Zero Mission is where to begin. It's a remake of the original NES game and is available on Game Boy Advance and the Wii U eShop. While yes, the original NES Metroid is on the Switch through the NES Online app, it hasn't aged well, to put it lightly. It's really easy to get lost owing to there being no map, and the difficulty is punishing. If you thought those bosses in Metroid Dread were hard, yeah, don't play Metroid 1. Zero Mission brings the first Metroid up to modern standards, not just by improving the visuals, but including a map, waypoint markers, better controls, additional bosses, and a whole new epilogue that includes Zero Suit Samus. The only slight downside is that it's really short, even by Metroid standards, with most first-run playthroughs clocking in at 3 to 4 hours. The bright side is that it leaves room for more playthroughs. Also, when you complete the game, you unlock the NES Metroid if you want to subject yourself to some torture. Still, it's cool to see the remake include the original game. I wish more remakes would do that. So Zero Mission is the place to start a chronological playthrough, but if you don't care about the story and want an atmospheric experience similar to Dread, then Metroid Fusion is the way to go. Also available on Game Boy Advance and Wii U. And if for some reason you come into contact with an Ambassador Edition 3DS, you can play it there as well. Basically, if you watched the plot recap of Metroid Dread and thought, hey, I'd love to play a video game about this sometime, well, that's what Metroid Fusion is, telling the story of Samus's battle with the X-Parasites on the Biologic Research Station. This being the last original 2D Metroid, obviously, Dread shares some similarities with it. For one, you talk to Adam every now and then, but in Fusion, he is your guide throughout the entire mission, telling you where to go and what to do. This consequently makes Fusion a more guided experience than Dread. However, you will also feel Dread while playing this game thanks to the SAX, an X-Parasite clone of Samus. The SAX was a precursor to the Emmy in a way, as Samus is unable to fight this enemy with her only options being to run and hide. Although it mostly appears in scripted sequences, that doesn't make it any less scary. While Fusion might be more similar to Dread in tone, the same can't be said for its setting or progression. It's linear and takes place on a research station. If you want a Metroid game that's more like Dread in terms of exploration, look no further than Super Metroid, available on the Switch through the SNES Online app as well as the new 3DS and Wii U eShops. This game tells the player nothing. Not what to do, not where to go, heck, it doesn't even mention the sprint button. That, and it doesn't take you on a guided path like Fusion and Zero Mission do. Instead, the path opens up with the gear you collect on the way. Kind of like Metroid Dread. Clearly, Dread uses Super Metroid as a basis for its exploration by not holding the player's hand. Granted, Dread at least gives some information on the next objective, but not to the point of placing a waypoint marker on the map, something Fusion and Zero Mission did frequently. That and Super Metroid made sequence breaking a staple of the franchise, allowing for items to be acquired out of order. And look at that, Metroid Dread did the same thing. That said, after Dread gave us the best handling Samus in the series, it certainly makes returning to Super a bit awkward by comparison. So if your favorite part of Metroid Dread was the feel of it, then it's time to bust out the 3DS and play Metroid Samus Returns, which was also co-developed by the same developer Mercury Steam and therefore has similar controls. Samus Returns introduced 360-degree aiming, the melee counter, and Aeon abilities, though some of these features don't work as well here as they do in Dread. The melee counter can only be used while standing still, so it makes the experience slower. That and the progression of the game is rather linear, with most of the bosses being Metroids themselves. That's because this game is a remake of Metroid 2, which chronicles Samus's mission to kill all the Metroids on planet SR-388, which is an important plot point in Metroid Dread. There are even teasers of Metroid Dread's plot within the Chozo archives of the game. In a way, Samus Returns is just as much of a prequel to Dread as Fusion is, and even if the gameplay elements don't work as well as they do in Dread, it will still feel familiar to those who just played that game. The controls are still smooth, the gameplay is still fun, and the bosses are challenging, even if there are only a few of them that aren't Metroids. If you enjoyed Mercury Steam's work on Metroid Dread, then you might just appreciate Samus Returns. So that covers it for the 2D Metroid games, and even though they have a chronological order to them, there's no harm in going out of order. The stories are pretty self-contained, and Super Metroid and Samus Returns show recaps of their predecessors to keep players up to speed. If you want to play them chronologically, the order goes Zero Mission, Samus Returns, Super Metroid, Fusion, and then Dread. That said, there is another way to play if you want to experience the gameplay evolution of Metroid, and that is release order. This includes Metroid on NES, Metroid 2 Return of Samus, Super Metroid, Fusion, Zero Mission, Other M, Samus Returns, and Dread. Admittedly, this would be a bigger challenge than playing them chronologically with the remakes, but it would be more rewarding as you'll witness the various gameplay improvements made to the series over time. That, and you'll fight Small Ridley in the NES version. It's a win-win. Of course, the chronological and release orders I mentioned only include the mainline Metroid entries, with Other M being the most unique on the list, but maybe you're looking for something completely different after finishing Metroid Dread. Perhaps you looked at those backgrounds and imagined what it would be like to explore those areas with 3D gameplay. Well, luckily for you, there is not one, not two, but 3 Metroid Prime games. The first 2 are on GameCube, but all 3 of them are on Wii via the Metroid Prime trilogy, which is also available for a mere $20 on the Wii U eShop. This trilogy brings the signature Metroid gameplay into first-person 3D, and it works. These games have gorgeous visuals, sprawling worlds, and amazing music. If you thought the soundtrack for Metroid Dread was good, you haven't heard anything yet. Plus, these worlds are rich with lore, being given to the player via the scan visor, which provides great details on animals, bosses, and written text. Of course, being first person, the combat is much different than that of the 2D games, with the focus being locking onto enemies and pummeling them with blasters and missiles. And it leads to some creative bosses, like the towering Quadraxis and the epic battle with Ridley down a tunnel. I love the Metroid Prime trilogy, and personally, Metroid Prime is my favorite game of all time, even after playing Dread. So if you're wanting more Metroid but in a different style, then I beg you to play the Metroid Prime trilogy. Still, you can't go wrong with any of the Metroid titles I mentioned here today. Hopefully most of them come out on the Switch in the near future, but if you have the means to play these games now, I urge you to wait no longer. So tell us, what Metroid games are you going to check out after beating Dread? Let us know in the comments below, and check out the videos on the right for more topics you might be interested in. Until next time, bye.